Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching Top 10's Net, and in the video today, 10 more little-known people who changed the world. History is full of people who made a difference in the world, for better or for worse. Yet, for various reasons, they often slip through the cracks of history and are rarely talked about, or even worse, are forgotten entirely. In the video today, we've got 10 more people who changed the world, and the reason it's more is because, yes, we previously did a part 1 of this. And just before we get started, there are some pronunciations in here that might be tricky. I did try looking them up. As always, if you want to have a go at me, just do so in the comments below. Number 10. Herschel Grishban. One of the pillars of the Nazi platform was to scapegoat and persecute the Jewish people. Of course, they had bigger plans for the Jews. Notably, they wanted to systematically exterminate them, but they needed a reason to move on to the next phase, and that reason would come in 1938. 17-year-old Herschel Grishban was a German-born Jew, and after the rise of the Nazi Party, he moved to France, where he lived in exile. He couldn't find work because he wasn't a legal citizen, and he was worried that if he did get a job, it would draw too much attention to him, and he would be sent back to Germany. On November 7th, 1938, he purchased a gun and a box of ammunition, and then he went to the German embassy. He walked up to Nazi German diplomat Ernst von Rath and shot him 5 times. Von Rath died 2 days later. On the day he died, Joseph Goebbels gave a speech and used the assassination as proof of how dangerous Jewish people were. That speech led directly to the Kristallnacht, also known as the Night of Broken Glass. On that night, throughout Germany, 200 synagogues were destroyed, Jewish businesses were ransacked, 100 Jewish people were killed, and over 30,000 men were arrested for being Jewish and then shipped off to concentration camps. Historians widely regard the Kristallnacht as the start of the Holocaust. It marked the turning point from persecution to violence, murder, and concentration camps. As for Grishban, he was arrested and held by the French. After the fall of France in June of 1940, Grishban was sent to Germany so that he could be questioned by the Gestapo. After that, no one is sure what happened to him, and for decades people just assumed that he died in a concentration camp. But then, in 2016, a historian found a picture in the archives of Vienna's Jewish Museum, and in the picture there is a man that looks like Grishban. This picture was taken at a camp of displaced people in 1946. If the person in the picture is really Grishban, it means he survived the war. However, this has never been conclusively confirmed, and his true fate is unknown. Number 9. Abraham Flexner. The most influential person in training new doctors wasn't a doctor at all. Abraham Flexner was an educator who was the founder and director of a preparatory college in Louisville, Kentucky. In 1908, he published The American College Criticism, which had suggestions and criticisms of how college in the United States should be taught. A lot of people dismissed it, thinking Flexner had no idea what he was talking about, but it did catch the attention of the Carnegie Foundation, who commissioned Flexner to look into 155 medical colleges in the United States and Canada. His study resulted in the Flexner Report, which had a massive effect on the way that medical schools are run. One of the big changes he suggested was to stop doing so many lectures and to get medical students more hands-on and practical experience. He also recommended that the standards for admittance should be raised and they should get rid of all for-profit schools. In the end, they ended up adopting all of his suggestions, thus creating the foundation of the modern School of Medicine. He also thought that a lot of the schools were in rough shape, so he recommended that 2/3 of them should be shut down. Within 25 years, the number of medical schools dropped from 155 to 66. Most of them were the ones that Flexner said needed to be closed. Number 8. Malcolm McLean. Malcolm McLean was born into a North Carolina farming family in 1914. During the Great Depression, he started a small trucking company, which grew to have over 1,700 trucks by the 1950s. What always struck McLean as a waste was when a ship came into port and all the merchandise had to be unloaded and then loaded onto the trucks. McLean thought, wouldn't it be great if you could just move a container from the boat to the truck? McLean decided to pursue this idea in the 1950s. He sold his share in the truck business for $6 million and then secured a bank loan for $42 million. He bought 2 oil tankers with this money and spent the rest retrofitting the tankers and docking and repair facilities in Port Newark, New Jersey. When he was done in April of 1956, the Ideal X was 30 feet long and held 58 boxes. McLean's containers caught on because his way was way more efficient. It saved money, and the sealed containers made it harder for dock workers to steal from the trucks. Soon, other dockyards were retrofitted to handle shipping containers, and 40 years later, they are still the norm. In 1996, about 90% of the trade in the world was transported in shipping containers on ships that were specifically designed to carry them. McLean sold his share in the shipping company in 1969 for $160 million. Afterwards, he dabbled in different things, but spent most of his time on his pig farm, where he worked until he died in 2001. Despite revolutionizing the world of trade and being a major contributor to globalization, McLean is a relatively unknown person today. Number 7. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky are a team of psychologists. And I guess as there are 2 people in this entry, it really should be the top 11 people, but that doesn't really fit our format. Further, Kahneman and Tversky were said to be such close friends and worked so closely together that people said they shared one brain. They met in the 1960s at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and their collaborative and incredibly influential work between 1971 and 1979 focused on 2 very distinct themes: judgment and decision-making. Judgment is weighing magnitudes and probabilities, such as, what are the odds that I'll get this job that I'm sort of qualified for? Where decision-making is how we choose, which is what happens all the time. For example, will I accept the job? What Kahneman and Tversky found was that people didn't think like statisticians. Indeed, not even trained statisticians think like logical statisticians when it comes to judgment and decision-making. Instead, people respond to something called heuristics, which are mental shortcuts that the human brain has developed that make us focus only on one aspect of complex problems. At first, they identified 3 heuristics, but more have been identified in the ensuing years. The first heuristic is availability. So, an example. What is more common in the United States, suicide by gun or homicide by gun? Even though suicide is more common, many people think that gun homicides happen more often. That's because when people think about gun deaths, they remember homicide by gun because they are reported in the news quite frequently, and suicide by gun is very infrequently mentioned. The second heuristic is representative. It works like this. Jeff has tattoos, plays the guitar, teenagers listen to him, and he spends many of his evenings in bars. Is it more likely that Jeff is a professional musician or a teacher? Based on the description, many people would pick musician, but statistically it's more likely that he is a teacher because in society there are an overwhelming amount of teachers compared to professional musicians. Another heuristic is the gambler's fallacy. Let's say you flip a coin 9 times and the order lands heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads. Now, some people may guess that the 10th flip will be tails, but the prior flips actually have no impact on that 10th flip. The final heuristic proposed by Kahneman and Tversky is anchoring and adjustment. That is where a person has a starting point that is familiar and then they adjust from there. For example, let's say someone asks you, is the population of Nigeria higher or lower than 15 million people? You answer what you think it is, and then they ask, what do you think is the specific amount of citizens in Nigeria? You would probably guess somewhere around 15 million people. Kahneman and Tversky's 1979 paper, Prospect Theory, an analysis of decision under risk, was revolutionary in the world of behavioral economics and forever changed the social sciences. Kahneman was awarded the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences in 2002, an award he would definitely have shared with Tversky, but sadly Tversky passed away in June of 1996 from metastatic melanoma. Number 6. Dietrich Eckart. One of Adolf Hitler's strongest personality traits was his charisma. It's arguably the main reason he was able to ascend to his position of power, which directly led to World War II and the Holocaust. Hitler's charisma was so pronounced that there have been a couple of books written solely on this very topic. What's interesting is that Hitler was actually an unlikely leader because, well, he was a straight-up weirdo. He was hate-filled and a deeply prejudiced man who didn't have many friends, and he had problems keeping relationships. He was also really terrible at debating. Then, in 1919, 30-year-old Hitler met Dietrich Eckart, who was one of the founders of the German Workers' Party. Eckart was a fierce anti-critic of the Treaty of Versailles, and he blamed Germany's loss in World War I on the Jews and the Social Democrats. Months before Eckart met Hitler, he wrote a poem in which he said that he would meet someone he called the Great One, the Nameless One, and whom all can sense but no one saw. When Hitler went to one of Eckart's speeches and the two met, Eckart felt like he met his German messiah. He helped Hitler find his voice and trained him to use his charisma. Eckart also introduced him to influential circles of people, and Hitler was able to raise money for the German Workers' Party. In 1920, the group Eckart co-founded was being led by his hand-picked protege, and they changed their name from the German Workers' Party to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazi Party. On November 9, 1923, Eckart was involved in the failed coup known as the Beer Hall Putsch. He was arrested but released a short time later because he was a sickly morphine addict. He died weeks later on December 26, 1923. Hitler dedicated a volume of Mein Kampf to the man he called a fatherly friend, and he also named a stadium after him, which was used in the 1936 Summer Olympics. Number 5. Hedy Lamarr. If you're a classic film buff, you might know who Hedy Lamarr is, because in the 1930s and 1940s, she starred in some well-known movies, including Boomtown with Clark Gable and Samson and Delilah with Victor Mature. Supposedly, she was the first choice of a producer to play Ilsa Lund in Casablanca, but the part ultimately went to Ingrid Bergman. While she's almost certainly the most famous person in the video today, Lamarr didn't change the world because she starred in some old movies. Instead, it was her hobby that changed the world, because in her spare time, Lamarr liked to work on inventions. In 1942, Lamarr was at the height of her acting career, but she wanted to help in the war effort. Specifically, she wanted to help the Allies come up with a communication system that couldn't be intercepted by enemies. So she and her friend, composer George Antheil, patented an idea for something they called the Secret Communication System. It was a system that would change radio frequencies in a pre-programmed method. If someone was listening, they would only hear snippets before it changed to a different frequency. Ultimately, the military didn't end up using this system, but decades later, Lamarr and Antheil's patent became really important because it was a cheap and effective way to create security in new emerging technologies like military communication, cellular phones, and Wi-Fi. As for Lamarr, her film career cooled down in the 1950s, and her last movie was released in 1958. She became reclusive in her later life and passed away on January 19, 2000. She was 86 years old. Number 4. Dennis Ritchie. Born in the Bronx in September of 1941, Dennis Ritchie got degrees from Harvard University in physics and applied mathematics, and then went to work at Bell Lab in Murray Hill, New Jersey. In the mid-1960s, Ritchie worked on a project called Multics, Multiplexed Information and Computing Service, which was a joint venture between Bell Lab, General Electric, and MIT. Bell Lab pulled out of the project in 1969, and Ritchie, along with his partner Ken Thompson, thought that it was too bad that they had to exit the project because they thought it had a lot of promise. The problem with the Multics project was that the operating system was too complex, so Ritchie and Thompson decided to make a smaller and simpler operating system, which they called Unix. Then, to ensure the operating system ran quickly and efficiently, Ritchie developed the C programming language, which was based off a never-used programming language that was invented at Cambridge and London universities in 1964 called CPL, or Combined Programming Language. Ritchie and Thompson distributed Unix free to universities who trained future computer scientists on the system. One devotee of Unix was Steve Jobs. He used it when he started Apple, and when he was fired in 1985, he used it to develop his next workstation. When he was hired back by Apple, he brought Unix back with him. As for the C programming language, it's essentially the foundation of the internet and modern computing. Nearly everything on the internet and all your smart devices uses C programming language or something that's a derivative of it. Other languages like Python and Ruby on Rails are implemented in C. Ritchie died on October 12, 2011, exactly 1 week after Steve Jobs died, and news of Jobs' death greatly overshadowed Ritchie's. When Ritchie died, Wired magazine called him the shoulders Steve Jobs stood on. Number 3. Percy Julian. Percy Julian was born in 1899 in Montgomery, Alabama, and was the grandson of former slaves. Since Julian was black, he wasn't allowed to attend high school. Instead, he applied to DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana, and was accepted, but had to take evening classes to get caught up. He graduated first in his class and then went on to get a master's degree from Harvard in chemistry, but they wouldn't allow him to get his doctorate. In order to do that, he left the country and got it from the University of Vienna in Austria. In 1935, while working at DePaul, he made an impressive breakthrough. He and his partner became the first people to synthesize physostigmine, which is used to treat people with glaucoma. While many other people would be offered a teaching position for such a breakthrough, Julian was black and he was never offered a full-time position. He ended up leaving academia and got a job at the Glidden Company in Chicago working with soybeans. While working there, he made several important discoveries. He was the first person to synthesize progesterone, which helps some women avoid miscarriages and is also used to treat cancer. He also synthesized testosterone that is still used in steroids steroids today. Finally, he also discovered how to make an inexpensive synthetic cortisone, which is used to treat rheumatoid arthritis. In total, Julian had more than 100 chemical patents, but his work was more influential than just the products he created. By making important medical products plentiful and less expensive, Julian accelerated the research and growth of knowledge about them. His techniques and products led directly to the development of chemical birth control and medicines that would suppress the immune system, crucial in performing organ transplants. Despite his overwhelming success, Julian faced a lifetime of hardship and violent discrimination because of his skin color. He never backed down and was a notable civil rights activist. Julian died in 1975, and just before he passed away, he said, "I have one goal in my life, that of playing some role in making life a little easier for the persons who come after me." Number 2. Edward Bernays. Bernays was born in Vienna, Austria in 1891, but his family moved to New York City when he was just 1 year old. When he was a young boy, he would travel to the Alps in the summer to spend time with his uncle, Sigmund Freud. As an adult, Bernays opened a public relations office, and his uncle sent him a copy of A General Introduction to Psychoanalysis. After reading this book, he realized that he could use psychoanalysis to persuade people to buy and do things without them even knowing that they were being influenced. To test his hypothesis, he tried to get women to smoke. In 1929, it was taboo for women to smoke because it made them look sexually promiscuous. Bernays knew that if women could smoke, his client, Lucky Strike Cigarettes, would make a lot of money. So Bernays consulted with Dr. A. Brill, who was the top psychoanalyst in New York. Brill said that cigarettes were symbolic of male power. Bernays came up with a campaign where he called Lucky Strike Cigarettes Torches of Freedom. He then got a list of debutantes from Vogue magazine and told them that if they smoked cigarettes in very public places like Fifth Avenue, that they would be helping women's rights. They were told to gather for the protest at the Easter Parade on the 1st of April 1929, and then the press were alerted that the women were going to be gathering to smoke. The press came out in droves, and the story of women lighting up cigarettes made news both nationally and internationally. While it did little for women's rights, it certainly did help the tobacco industry. The Beech-Nut Packing Company also hired Bernays because they were having a problem selling one of their products: bacon. Yep, that's right, there was a time in America when bacon wasn't extremely popular. To get people to eat more bacon, Bernays surveyed physicians and asked them what would be better, a light breakfast or a hearty breakfast. They overwhelmingly responded that a hearty breakfast was better, so Bernays created a marketing campaign that said doctors recommend a breakfast of bacon, eggs, and toast, ultimately giving birth to the all-American breakfast. These are just two very specific ways Bernays changed the world, but his application of psychoanalysis to marketing is something that has had a ripple effect on even the advertising and the propaganda that we see today. Number 1. Maurice Hilleman. You know what's great about living in modern times? Not dying in childbirth from disease, or losing a child or a sibling or a relative or a friend due to something like measles or rubella. The man that tens of millions of people have to thank for that is American microbiologist Maurice Hilleman. Hilleman was born in Montana in 1919 and got his PhD in microbiology from the University of Chicago in 1944. After graduating, he went to work as a researcher at E.R. Squibb & Sons, where he developed his first vaccine, which was used to protect American troops from the Japanese B encephalitis virus. Hilleman then went on to work at Merck & Co. Inc., where he developed or improved around 40 different vaccinations. This includes vaccinations for chickenpox, hepatitis A and B, measles, meningitis, mumps, and rubella. Out of the 14 vaccinations that are recommended for children today, 9 of them were developed by Hilleman. According to the New York Times, he saved more lives than any other scientist in the 20th century. But despite all of this, he was never awarded the Nobel Prize, although he arguably did deserve to win. Instead, something rather unusual happened in 1998, towards the end of Hilleman's life. A respected medical journal, The Lancet, published an article by Dr. Andrew Wakefield, who said that the rise in the prevalence of autism was caused by Hilleman's MMR vaccine, which is a vaccination for meningitis, mumps, and rubella, and it combined what was previously 6 shots into just 2. So instead of getting the Nobel Prize for saving millions of lives, he got hate mail for causing autism. In the years since that article was published, it has been widely discredited because there is absolutely no evidence of a link between vaccinations and autism. The Lancet has since retracted the article, and in 2010, Wakefield was stripped of his medical license. However, unfortunately, the damage, it was already done. So I really hope you enjoyed that video, and do not forget to subscribe to this channel for brand new videos every day of the week. Also, I've got another channel, it's called Biographics. It's biographies of notable people from the present day as well as history. history, from Elon Musk to Osama bin Laden. You can check it out through the icon on the screen now. But if you want to watch something else right now, why not check out another Top 10s video or a biographics video over there on the right. And as always, thank you for watching.